I think I heard you quote somewhere that like 86% of the commercial transactions are taking place in person anyways, and that's the market you're going for. Did I get that stat right? Or was that pre-pandemic? Or
No, that's post-pandemic.
really?
So it's actually,
That
it
would
used to be over 90% in the US. Yeah.
that's would surprise most people because they just assume they're making everything online in payments. But is the reality different because they're not remembering each one of those physical payments they make?
Yeah. So think about anyone that drives, all your fuel purchases are done in person. When you go to the grocery store, all of those purchases are done in person. Still, clothing and other like durable goods at home, all your furniture is a lot of it is purchased in person. So there's surprisingly a lot more physical retail payments than I think people recognize, particularly around grocery. Those are some of the biggest markets out there. So, or like a movie theater, right? All these things you start adding up, you're like, oh, I actually do a lot of these things as like a physical human being, and I'm making all these payments where a lot of the convenience products you're often buying online. So e-commerce is still absolutely still accelerating, right? So it's not slowing down at all, and the pandemic made it growing faster. So I think that number is going to continue going down and down and down, but I don't see a world where it becomes zero, or there'll be some point where it stabilizes, where there's just a certain amount of things we always buy in person. It'll just maintain that way.
Yeah, now that I think about it, every time I double click my phone and use Apple Pay during the day, it's quite a few times, because I'm walking here doing this, doing that. So it's actually more than how often do I use Amazon? Once every couple days. So it makes a really good point. All right, let's look at a use case scenario right now. Say I go to a store that accepts, say, Bitcoin, if you find one out there, or Litecoin, and it gives me the option of paying with crypto versus that same store that accepts Flexa. And I don't know a good example. I don't know if Starbucks accepts that. Probably it doesn't. But I walk in right now. First of all, is it even physically possible to pay with Bitcoin with the speed of transactions right now? What is the current state of the art? Because I don't think most people know transaction times, any of those other friction points that are currently there.
Oh man, I could take a few hours to answer that question. The short answer is it depends, and it's all about the context. So first thing is, do people want to spend Bitcoins? That's already a whole hurdle and discussion right just there. But assuming they do,
Which is,
it depends
but they
on the
don't.
context.
They don't, do they?
I don't think they do. I mean, why would you, right? It's narrative right now, right, wrong, or whatever, is that it's a store of value. And why would you go buy things with the store of value that you bought with the intent of it appreciating further? As a narrative, right? So you can agree or disagree, but that is the prominent narrative. So I don't really think people want to spend that stuff. But assuming they do, now it really depends on what you're buying and what the context is. If it's someone that you reasonably trust, or it's a small transaction, you could probably do zero, unconfirmed transactions. Just anything in the mempool is going to be fine, and you can actually get transactions pretty quickly that way. So buying coffee in a reasonable way from someone, or a small or medium-sized merchant, might just work great actually.
With like Bitcoin, with Bitcoin would
Yeah.
probably, but only Bitcoin right now. Nothing else would.
Almost anything, right? If it was a small transaction, if you were to give me $10 in crypto with really, because the only thing that can happen is that you would basically replace that transaction with a higher fee transaction, or you could work through some sort of malicious network to try to take over the network, or you had some insider information, you knew there was going to be some sort of weird fork happening, like these sorts of things. The reality is, for a $10 transaction, that just doesn't even play into the scope of practical usability. So for small transactions, I think it's just completely fine. You can just say, oh, hit the mempool. It only takes a few seconds. Like, this would actually be fine, and I can accept this payment. The problem, though, is that it starts to scale. That becomes now non-trivial of what risk is actually there. So there isn't an exact, threshold. But let's say you're someone like Walmart, and you might be accepting $10 million worth of transactions within 10 minutes. That's now a problem, because that is a scale where now a miner could collude and actually, present a different version of the chain. And now all those transactions never occurred, right? Or you could replace all those transactions, with replace by fee. And that's so economically feasible. Like, in fact, it's like the outcome. This is what fraudsters do. There's literally stats that say something like, a sad stat of something like, all internet traffic to the continent of Africa, like 60% is fraud, like 60. because of how many operations have been set up there around just like literally financial transaction fraud. So that's just the scale that we're dealing with, to where if you're going to open up a network like this, like they don't understand it now and it's not accepted the same way, but there is zero chance that if there's a vulnerability where people can print tens of millions of dollars just through a simple vulnerability like that, it will happen. So there's a threshold where it becomes practically usable and fine versus there's no possible way we would ever consider this because this would be financial suicide. Okay. So there's some inflection in the middle.
Now, even though these are in-persons, because it's one thing if I swarm their online site with, 400 orders and 1,000 each, but if you got to be in person for each one, does that reduce the chance of fraud, or it still can be done?
Still depends, right? So let's say it was large enough and I was buying a $5,000 TV or something, right, from one of these places. And then I had 100 of my friends, or 1,000, because again, these are crime syndicates that literally do this today. And 1,000 people are now all of a sudden buying these multi-$1,000 TVs to really push this up into the multi-million-dollar figures all at once. And at a scale like Walmart, I mean, you have more than 1,000 stores. So that's actually fairly feasible and wouldn't even look all that crazy to happen. And what they do is you make all those transactions, and now all of a sudden there's millions of dollars worth of one confirmation transactions. And then you could just, attack the chain and potentially, publish a new version, and you could collude with miners. And again, is it likely? Probably not, but it's a possibility. And it's certainly not a risk that a merchant would underwrite by saying, oh yeah, we'll do this. And we're totally subject to this black swan of something happening. And we could just lose all these transactions, all this value at any given time. Because the short is just talking around economic finality, to where the easy description is, let's just hypothetically say it costs $50,000 to, it's close, write a block to the Bitcoin blockchain, right? So if that costs you $50,000, if I'm going to give you $500,000 in a transaction, well, economically, just very hand wavy and straightforward, I should wait for 10 Bitcoin blocks, because in theory, then it's economically advantageous to you to try to build the system to actually, take over the chain, rewrite transactions, because I need 10 blocks, which would equate to $500,000 worth of value, where you'd get more than that back if you were able to rewrite the chain in less than 10 blocks. So that's, a little bit of hand wavy math, but the concept is absolutely true. And so that's what this economic finality concept is, everyone likes to talk about, oh, this state of this blockchain is final, right? This is a final state, like, totally immutable. Like, yes, but there's always a cost where it can be. There's always a non-infinite cost to make something completely rewritable and to change the state of the chain. If you take over the chain, or in a proof of stake network, there's other types of different attacks that you can experience. So again, you just need to get to a state where that's economically infeasible or economically not valuable, and then you're in great shape.
Right.
So I am by no means saying this is a negative necessarily of the system, but it's a limitation that to really harness all these sorts of payments, you just need to be really aware of. And it's things like how exchanges, right? Crypto exchanges are the same, where they wait for a certain amount of confirmations before they'll let you trade or draw assets, right? So it's all just very much the same concept.